I'm ready to put the pistons in the cylinder block and then assemble the block onto the crankcase and hook up the rods. I put on the flywheel, which I'll show you first thing in this episode. I'll show you how I pressed that on or pulled it onto the crankshaft. And then we'll get to putting on the cylinder block and hooking up the rods and getting all that working. So first of all, I want to show you a little bit what I learned on these piston rings. Here at the cylinder block, I had several different sets of piston rings, and so I was trying to find one that would fit into the cylinder with about a 35 thousandths gap, because my machinist here in Ogallala told me that I should have about 5 thousandths per inch of diameter of the piston. So I got 6.5, and so that's like 35 thousandths. So I put several rings in here and measured them, and I just go with my caliper right here, put the little pointed edges inside there, and I come up with 36 thousandths. So that's exactly about what I was looking for. It seemed like the 90 over piston ring sets that I had would have different gap in here. Some of them were like 20 thousandths, and then like this set was 36 thousandths, which is about where it should be at, so it doesn't lock up. But I think I've come to realize that some of those ring sets are meant to be put in worn cylinders. So if you have a worn 90 over cylinder, well, there's different ring sets that you could get to take up that gap a little bit more, so you didn't have like 50 thousandths gap in here if you put in a new ring set in a worn cylinder. So I think that's the reason that some of the ring sets only had 20 thousandths gap in them, is because they were for worn cylinders. So in new cylinders, I found this set that had the 35 thousandths or 36 thousandths gap, which would be correct for a 6.5 inch bore. And then also I learned something. I found this tag in the piston set. It says down here about halfway down, it says square cut piston rings have correct gaps and require no filing to the cylinder, or no fitting to the cylinder. Diagonal cut piston rings require fitting to the cylinder. So if there were ring sets that were cut square, and then there's other ones that are cut diagonal, and apparently the diagonal ones need to be filed or ground to the proper gap, whereas the squared off ones should be ready to go. But you also got to watch out for the ring sets that are fitted to a worn out cylinder too. So just wanted to point that out to everybody, and make sure you got enough gap in here when you put it together. Otherwise, when it gets hot, it'll have a tendency to lock up. So just a cautionary word there. And then this was one of the oil rings that was in the set and the original packaging. And the 1428 is for 90 over pistons, but it shows you which way to put the ring in on the piston, which is what I'm going to do here shortly. So I'll set up and put the rings on and assemble the rod and all that good stuff. I'm ready to put the rings on the piston, and according to, this is the ring that was in this little package, and you put the taper to the top end of the piston. So we'll do that one first. There's a taper on that right there, so we want to flip it over and make that go to the top of the piston. And then all the rest of the rings are the same. What I do is I put the first two opposite of each other, and then I put the next one 90 degrees to that one, and then the other one I'll put up here. So you don't want to have all the ring gaps in the same area. You want to spread them out as much as possible. And then this rod, I was cleaning it up and realized the oil hole wasn't in the oil passage. So you want to make sure you look down through there and make sure the oil passage is open and that the bushing is in line in here with the oil passage. And so I got to inspecting it and I was fooling around with it a little bit and it was just loose in there. So I found a new bushing and I installed that, and I think it's going to fit snug enough to be fine. I suppose if I was going to the field with it, I might change rods, but I think it's probably going to be fine for this application. And so you want to put the number of the journal on the top of the piston and probably put a little oil in there, get everything to lubricated. Number on the top end of the piston, so when I insert it in the crankshaft, I'll know this is rod number 1. And I got everything cleaned up in these holes on the piston. I honed those out until the pin slid in fairly snug, but it was still loose that you could get it in. You don't want to have a loose pin in there. And then you got to watch the little flat spot in there on the set screw. You got to make sure that that's in the right spot. I can see down in there that I just need to go just a touch more with that pin. I can see the shoulder of that groove, and that's pretty close right there. I ground the set screw flat again. Sometimes they get to moving in there and they get fouled up on the end. Get that snugged up pretty good. And then tighten down the jam nut. Not sure I got that jam nut backed off enough on that one. Back that jam nut off and try it again. You gotta make sure your set screw is seated in there and tight. Yeah, now my jam nut's loose and I can tighten it down there. And now the fun part is to get the wire in there. Okay, there we go. And the rod turns freely and slides back and forth freely. We'll take it over and slip it into the cylinder block. Okay, I'm ready to start inserting the piston. I'm going to oil the rings up. Give them good lubrication. On the oil ring, I'm going to put the gap to the top. and then space out the gap on the other ones. Make sure they got oil all the way around. You need one of these big old ring compressors to get those in there. Otherwise, it's somewhat of a job. And mine doesn't want to hold the way it should. Get everything on there square. It wants the tendency to pull this edge of that ring compressor down into the cylinder. So you don't want to push that piston down there. There's a flange on the other side of the cylinder, and you don't want to push it past that. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to get it back out. So about halfway. So now I'm ready to get the crane over here and get it lifted up and ready to set in the tractor. As you can see, I'm getting rigged up to put the flywheel on. I've got it up there and started to be pulling it on, so I'm going to take my crane away. So I'm tied into these outside two bolts here, the front and back bolt of that bearing flange, with some ready bolt and a bar out here to pull on the flywheel, and now I just have to screw it on and work it on. Go back and forth on the bolts. Don't hit yourself with the wrench. Make sure the oil slinger slot lines up with the dowel pin. Gives you a pretty good workout. Oil slinger starts to engage into the dowel. You make sure that goes in there. Otherwise, you have to try to get a punch in there to move that oil slinger. Or it'll abruptly come to a stop and you wonder why when you're about a quarter inch away. It's starting to engage now in that slinger. It's all tightened up in there now. And I don't know if you can see, I put a race in there for a spacer, because a lot of times that crankshaft will come out proud of the flywheel, so you need a little something to allow that crankshaft to come proud. And then once I get it clear and like that, I want to go in and seat it. Give it a couple whacks on the other side. And that will allow a little bit of clearance in here between the first throw and the main bearing. And all the in play will be on the flywheel flange. See that crankshaft to come out, it's not quite out 1/8 of an inch. But you can see the in play think it looks pretty good. I think I'll leave right there. The keyway is just about where it should be. I might drive it in just a touch so it's flush with the flywheel. But I think we're pretty well on. As you can see, that flywheel's an original that's been fixed at one point. And it came off of another crankshaft, a standard crank, pretty tight. They had looked like they had built it up on the inside of the hub also and cut it down to fit. So I am going to tighten it up and see if it doesn't crack after I tighten it up. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to use it. It's hard to find a decent original flywheel. These ready bolts out. And maybe I should tighten up those flywheel bolts so it doesn't turn on me. I want to give it at least what this wrench will do. Okay. I'll take these ready bolts out. Yeah, it rolls pretty nice. Just a little bit of end play. And yeah, probably need to give these just as much as we can give them with that wrench. But I can't if I go down like that. I want to tighten them evenly. Okay, so I gave it all I could with this wrench. I put it down there and pushed my foot on that. Tightened them up evenly. Sure want to do that. And then you want to make sure you got a hollow keyway in here. I've heard of stories where guys will put in solid keyways and then for some reason the timing gets off and it backfires. I've heard that they can break those flywheels if that key doesn't give away. So you want to make sure you put in a hollow key and tighten them up as much as you can. And I'll see if that flywheel will hold up, but I think it will, even though it's got a fix along there. It looks good anyway. Well, we'll start on the block and get that put in. Okay, I got the block up here next to the tractor ready to be put in. I've oiled the followers, so when I push the push rods in, they'll be seated into oil, and oiled the camshaft, and I got the oil pump, it's pumping oil, and there's oil coming out of the journals. So I'm ready to push this back in there. And I've also put the gasket in and put some sealer on it. Feed the rods back in there. Now we'll get the front pedestal underneath there. I'm not sure I can with my chain underneath there, but it might be problematic. It should work, but I gotta jack up the crankcase a little bit. Okay, we're getting close. Let's see if we can get this pin in the bottom. Snug these up a little bit, and we'll be ready to put it on all fours. Okay, it's officially a rolling chassis now. So I'll reset the camera into the crankcase and we'll hook up the connecting rods. Now I've been working on these rod bearings, and I've test fitted them, and I took two brass little shims that are 3/100, 3/1000 a piece. Took two out of each shim, so it took 6/1000 out. Now we're going to take two out of this side. So I'll go and split these with the knife. So I'm taking out two of the brass shims, the thin ones. And you want to make sure you got two steel halves on the outside, because they go up against the bearing like that, and you don't want the brass shims working into this. Taking two out of this one. Make sure your bolts, there's a shoulder that they go into on the back side of that rod. Make sure they're seated in. Make sure it still turns. And now you want to just rock it back a little bit and forth. You can hear the oil in there giving just a touch. And you want to get it to where it still turns free, but you can't really see any slack in the bearing. They're supposed to be between 3 and 5/1000 clearance in there, but I think I've got it pretty close. It turns pretty free, but I can't really see any back and forth. You can hear the oil in the bearing a little bit, but you can't really see any wiggle back and forth. So I think I've got them about where I want them. I'll turn the nuts so I can put cotter keys in them, and I'll be done there, and then we can start working on the head.